If you were looking at me thinking, Rachel, why do you look like you've just rolled out of bed and why isn't your hair brushed? The answer is I'm a strong, independent woman and I can do whatever I want to on a Sunday morning. The only person who's gonna be embarrassed is me. I need more tea. Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to another weekly reading wrap-up. I have 4 things to talk about this week, which feels like quite a low number compared to what I've been talking about in previous weeks so far this year, and that's because I actually spent a lot of my reading time in the past 7 days or so starting books and then deciding I wasn't going to actually finish them. Which is not a bad thing, actually. I did the try chapter tag last weekend. I had that video up already, and I got rid of like 4 books from that. I've already read 2 of the 3 books that I kept though, which is very good. And then, as is usual, whenever I do a video like that, I'm usually so much in the mood to keep doing it that I do another batch of books off camera. So I basically did that this past week, and I got rid of even more books from my physical TBR shelf. And it was not time wasted, let's say. I feel very accomplished and like I got things out the door that I didn't actually need, that I wasn't interested in anymore. And I have a feeling I will talk endlessly about the 4 things I did finish unless I cut myself off. And I have things to do today before I go off and do a live show, so I may be brief and not describe a lot of plot details here. So first up are the 2 books that I read after doing the try a chapter tag. So first up is Wrack by James Bradley. I really enjoyed this book. I read almost all of it in a single evening and just a few hours. Part of that is because it's structured with these very short chapters and lots of breaks and switching between the narrative and flashbacks and like info dumping stuff about history and maps. And it just had this very, like, one more chapter feel to it, which makes a book sometimes very easy to speed through. I loved this mainly because of the historical fiction aspect, the bits about searching for a lost Portuguese shipwreck on the coast of Australia and the fact that it may be proof, if found, that the Portuguese knew about Australia like 2 centuries before anybody else in the West did. And then all the bits about maps and what we think we know people in ancient times knew about the world from their maps, which are of course very inaccurate, very distorted, and essentially that any map, if it's not a globe, is going to have distortions. And I find those 2 things, shipwrecks and maps, to be really fascinating. Some of this is not real history, it's based on real history, but Bradley has taken creative license with a lot of it, but it was still fascinating to read. But even though it has some aspects of historical fiction in it, this is basically a literary fiction novel, and the drawbacks, the things that I see most people critiquing this book for and why it has such low ratings on Goodreads, is that it's full of miserable, unlikable people in unhappy or not good relationships, and the ending is really disappointing to a lot of people. And I recognize both of those things. I was getting a little bit bored with the miserable people. The main character, David, is an archaeologist who's obsessed with finding the shipwreck, and he draws his ex-girlfriend back into the story, and they're unhappy with each other, they're not talking to each other, they may be falling in love again, and even though they're not communicating, they just happen to start having sex again. And I was like, people, no. There's also, they're talking to an old man who's telling his story of like searching for the shipwreck in the 1930s and during World War II, and his love affair with the wife of the man who employs him and is also like his best friend. And that doomed love affair in the past was actually part of the narrative, but the stuff between David and his ex-girlfriend was so unnecessary to the story. I was like, why are you doing this? However, the ending, I was expecting the ending. I wasn't shocked by it. I would have been more surprised if it didn't end that way, actually. And if you're gonna read this book, I would say prepare yourself by the ending by recognizing that David's ex-girlfriend multiple times points out to him that the old man that they are taking care of, who's dying and telling them his story, is a freaking nasty piece of work. He's an unreliable narrator and he's hiding something from them. It's not going to go well. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars because it was so readable, it was so compelling, I was so into it, but I recognize the same flaws that I think a lot of other people have pointed out. Next up, I finished Asteroid Made of Dragons by G. Derek Adams, and I don't have much to say about this one. I was really taken with the prologue in the first chapter that I read during my Try Chapter Tag video, because I really liked Xenon, the goblin scholar, in the first chapter. However, there are actually a lot more characters in the story, a lot more viewpoints and stories that intersect by the end, and I just got annoyed with a bunch of the characters. Xenon, the goblin, seemed like a very interesting person at the beginning, but then you learn more about her and her home life and her family and her insecurities, and she just instantly became less interesting when she started to be more of a cliche, I think. And then there is Rhyme, who is a wild mage. I thought she was a really unlikable brat, and her like bodyguard companion Jonas, who I thought was a limp rag with no spine and no personality. And there are more characters too, and it's basically Xenon discovers that there is this thing called shame that is returning, and it is going to be disastrous. She's trying to find out more and convince people that there's a threat coming, and yeah, then we have the very anticlimactic climax of the book where I lost the thread of what was actually happening. It was alright. If you're reading it just on a superficial level for the jokes and the fun and stuff, it's fine, but if you want more than that, it's probably going to be disappointing. After that, I finished Tripoint by C.J. Cherryh. This is another one of her Company Wars books set in the Alliance Union universe, and I would actually rank Tripoint up there at the top of my list of favorites from the series. My favorite is Down Below Station, and I might actually put Tripoint right below that one. Heavy Time is also pretty far up on the list too. And that really surprised me because I initially was unsure if I would enjoy this story, because rape is basically the instigator of the story, the catalyst of the situation. It's the motivation for everything that happens in this, for the whole situation to come about. And I'm not cool with rape really being used that way as a plot device. However, I think that you could have a really interesting discussion about how rape is viewed and how the people involved in this, the perpetrator and the victim, how they are treated, how their stories are different. You see two very different sides of this particular event, and I find both of them, there's a bit of a middle ground, like an agreement on what happened, but there's also some really big differences. And yeah, I think that's something you could have a really interesting discussion about, what you feel is true, and was it done well, were people treated right and everything. So the basic situation here is that the young man at the heart of the story, Tom Hawkins, he is from a family merchanter ship. His mother, Marie, was raped and assaulted by a man named Austin Bowes from a different ship called the Corinthian. And his mother, Marie, hates Austin Bowes, and her ship and his ship avoid each other for a couple of decades. Tom grows up knowing about this event, which is a whole nother problem, for a young boy to be raised knowing that he is the product of rape and being talked to constantly about that. Not good. But basically everyone suspects that Marie is hatching a long-term plan to get her revenge on Austin Bowes for this event. And the fact that she got pregnant and chose to keep the child, Tom, they think that she's going to involve Tom in that as well. And then the two ships happen to arrive at the same station at the same time, and Tom accidentally ends up on the Corinthian and meets his father and his half-brother, and yeah, I think the description on the back says he's like shanghaied. He's actually sort of kidnapped, but in a way that's done because if they hadn't taken him, he would have died in the situation that he was in. It's very confusing. So he ends up on this ship that he has been told his entire life is full of pirates and criminals, with a father that he's been told is evil, with a half-brother that he didn't even know he had, and he might be stuck there. Can he run away? Does he want to run away? Will somebody there help him get away? And who can he trust? For me, the big running theme in this, and one of the saddest and most painful things, is that Tom constantly has to choose whether he's going to trust people, knowing full well that he'll probably be betrayed. Every single person in his life has manipulated him, treated him badly, betrayed him, and even if he likes somebody, even if he feels like they're a good person, I don't think he can actually trust that feeling, and he knows it. So yeah, it's really complicated to explain actually without going into endless detail about all of his relationships with people. But I thought that it was really heartbreaking how his relationship with his mother and his family had been so twisted, and a lot of that comes back to actually how Marie was treated by her family after she was raped, and how that changed her as well. I feel like something bad actually really happened to her, but nobody took it very seriously. They kind of blamed her and her more impetuous personality for that, and she didn't get the help that she needed. She's a survivor of rape, and she's had that trauma. Nobody's helped her deal with it. And I don't find it surprising at all that the one thing she still has is her revenge. And she becomes obsessed with that in some way, and that it twists her relationship with her family and with her son, and then it messes up his life. It's just this cascade of errors, you know? And Tom, who is the innocent party here, is the one who has to deal with that fallout. So I had my initial misgivings about just the presence of rape in the story, and I actually felt like it was, I don't know if I really like the way that like Marie was treated or some of the ways that this event is talked about, but I still felt like in general it was done well as a part of the plot. It certainly made for a very interesting story, and I found a number of characters in this to be quite interesting and sympathetic. Tom in particular, I just felt very sympathetic towards him, and he wasn't a completely weak character relying on other people. He actually was thinking things through and trying to be a bit proactive, and I feel like that kind of differentiates him from some other characters in books, like Decker, for example, from Heavy Time and Hellburner, was very sympathetic mainly because he was a victim, but he didn't actually take much action in either of those books, whereas in this one, Tom is actually trying to do things. So this one I really enjoyed. I think I'm even going to keep this copy of the book because some of the others I'm getting rid of, but this one I think I might like to have around in the future. And the last thing that I finished this week that I spent a lot of the month reading actually is How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin, which is her short story collection. I buddy read this with Maya during March, and it was really nice to have somebody to talk to about the individual stories. I think we quite agreed on the things that we liked and didn't like so much in here. I think overall this is a really strong collection. I didn't feel like any of the stories were weak or badly written. The only ones that I didn't like were just like the ones that personally were not to my taste, and I could recognize that it was me and not necessarily the story. I'm not going to talk about a bunch of the stories individually. I'll just mention some in here that I thought were really good. The City Born Great and Red Dirt Witch were probably my favorites in this one. I really love The City Born Great. I love the language in it. It has this tone and this style. It's very bold and I love it. And Red Dirt Witch was, I read it for the first time in this. I read The City Born Great before. And Red Dirt Witch was such a surprise. I enjoyed it immensely. It's basically a fae story in the American South, which I've never read that combination before. It was really interesting. L'Alchimista, The Evaluators, Cuisine de Memoire, that's a French title, I don't know how to pronounce that, On the Banks of the River Lex, and Sinner Saints, Dragons and Haints, and The City Beneath the Still Waters. Those are probably my absolute favorites from here. So yeah, so glad I finally read this. This was excellent. I really hadn't read much of Jemisin's shorter works before, and it was really, really good. There are some things missing from this. She's got at least 2, maybe 3 novellas that are not included in this, and I imagine it's because this is short fiction and not novellas, but I need to go track down some of those other things now. So that is everything that I finished this past week. I feel like I actually did this pretty quickly. Yay, that never happens. Let me know if you have read any of these, if you have any thoughts on them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back to talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.